They let me go the same day my son got promoted, confetti in his office, silence in mine. Name's Ray 61, used to fix vending machines under fluorescent buzz and cold draft from the AC. Still carry my old employee badge, laminated cracked at the corner. Ever had someone laugh at your losses? Before realizing you'd been keeping receipts. The first thing I noticed was the angle. Wide enough to show the frosted trees, the porch swing, and every smiling face under the cabin's cedar eaves. Aveline's husband wore his usual puffer vest. Thatcher held a hot chocolate, and the twins posed with their lopsided snowman. The caption read, "So glad we all made it this year." I blinked at the word, all let it soak like cold water seeping through a sock. It wasn't the first time, but this time there it was, visual, irrefutable, curated. No one had told me, no call, no stray text, just their holiday on display, framed and filtered in Lake Geneva light, while I sat in Milwaukee finishing lukewarm ravioli straight from the can. Across from me, the old bookshelf sagged slightly. Still holding a 5x7 from 2001, Dad, me, and the bronze key dangling between us. He had insisted we take that photo after our first full winterization of the cabin. Our hands red from the cold, his smile tight but proud. That was the year he called me his co-captain. That was the last year I remembered the cabin feeling like home. The framed photo's glass had cracked at one corner during my last move, but I never replaced it. Something about the split felt accurate. I refreshed the feed. Another post. Aveline had uploaded an album, snowbound but hearts full. I counted 12 images before I stopped myself, each one a tiny paper cut. Every smiling frame without me echoed a deeper truth: I'd become the kind of person people forgot to include. I set the phone down face down on the table. Silence in my apartment was always loudest after 9 p.m. The neighbors below me had quieted, and only the tap of snow against the window reminded me I was still anchored in time. I stood up, walked over to the shelf, and picked up the bronze key. Cold, slightly dented along one edge, still attached to the same cracked leather loop from 20 years ago. I hadn't been to the cabin since Dad passed. The last time was late fall 2019. Thatcher and I had gone up to help Aveline box up some of his things. She cried once, then never again. I cried twice and haven't stopped, just spaced the tears out across years. I thumbed the key surface. Still there, the faint engraving on the bow to Lakeside. Dad said he had it made custom in 1999, just after the final payment cleared. No more banks, no more threats. It's ours, he'd whispered. I opened my laptop, booked a cheap rental car for Friday, emailed my manager for a sick day, half lie, half self-preservation. Then I stood stretched and quietly packed a single duffel, one sweater, my thermos, the snow boots I hadn't worn in 3 winters, no toothbrush. I'd get one on the road. The next morning, I called the rental company to confirm pickup. Out of instinct, I searched for the cabin's listing online. Maybe it had been rented out again. Maybe that's why I wasn't told. It came up on the third result: Lakeside Haven. Modern rustic sleeps, 10 newly renovated. New ownership since 2021. Exclusive access. New ownership. I blinked, then read again. Refreshed the page. My name wasn't on the title anymore. When had that changed? Did Aveline sell? Did Thatcher agree? Did they even need my signature? Or had it just happened like most things in my family? Quiet assumed irreversible. I stood by the window. Milwaukee's sky was the color of dishwater. I held the key tighter. That night, I sat on the couch and laid out the key. The old photo in Dad's flannel sweater, the one with the stitched elbow and the faint scent of cedar still clinging. I didn't cry, not really, but the space behind my eyes ached in that familiar way, like a storm threatening. I poured myself a finger of bourbon, not for the taste, but for the burn. It felt earned. The next morning I'd go. I didn't know what I'd find, if the locks had changed, if someone new would answer the door, but I'd go. Not for a fight. Not for a scene, just to see. I ran my thumb along the key's jagged teeth, then turned it over, feeling the cold kiss my palm. Let's see who changed the locks. The wind off Lake Geneva hadn't changed. It still carried that damp mineral chill, the kind that curled under your collar and sat heavy in your lungs. But the houses along Birch Point Lane had changed. So had the people behind the windows. I parked the rental, a dull gray Hyundai that hummed like a tired mosquito, behind the lakeside lodge. Only 2 other cars in the lot. Inside, the desk clerk handed me a key card without much eye contact. His name tag read Micah, but he looked like he hadn't said his own name aloud in days. I signed the form, left a modest tip, and climbed the creaky stairs to room 204. The room smelled like old pine cleaner and newer loneliness. I dropped my duffel on the armchair, washed my face in the cold sink, and stepped back outside before I could change my mind. It had been 4 years since I walked this stretch. The slope down to the lake still crunched underfoot, the same frost-heaved sidewalks buckled where roots had grown bold. But the coffee shop across from the old bait store now had a name I didn't recognize, Driftwood Roastery. All lowercase letters and modern signage. I paused at the window. Inside, a young woman swept behind the counter, earbuds in. No trace of the dusty Grindhouse Cafe sign I remembered. No trace of the greasy spoon warmth. I kept walking. The closer I got to the cabin, the more my chest tightened. Not out of fear, out of memory. My dad and I used to count the number of flagpoles along the lakefront 11 and summer 7 in winter. Today there were 5, but 1 had toppled in the snow. I mentally noted it because that's what I do. I collect the small absences. There it was, the cabin had always been modest. Gray shingle roof, stone steps, a crooked mailbox shaped like a loon. Now the mailbox was gone. A new iron fence lined the property, black and shiny. A luxury SUV sat in the driveway, sleek, out of place. Most jarring of all, the carved wooden plaque that once read Tate Family. Esther 1999 had been sanded clean. Only faint grooves remained like the ghost of a name. I stepped closer. The front door had a keypad now. The bronze key in my coat pocket pressed against my thigh, warm from body heat, but useless. I didn't try it. From behind a curtained window, a flicker of movement. I stepped back onto the sidewalk, heart drumming with something between ache and embarrassment. The local cafe was quieter than I remembered. I pushed the door open, letting a bell chime faintly above me. Inside, polished concrete floors, Edison bulbs, exposed beams. Same building, different soul. A woman at the counter glanced up, late 20s, auburn bun-chipped nail polish, and a sweatshirt that said, "Support local planets." She smiled. "What can I get you, Drip?" "Medium, whatever's fresh," she poured. "You visiting, sort of. I used to come here a lot." She nodded, then turned. "Grandma, you got a visitor." From the back, a familiar voice carried through Ellison Tate as I live and breathe. I turned. Mrs. Irene Kerner emerged wrapped in a shawl the color of cherry bark. She looked exactly the same, sharp eyes, a walk that still had purpose. My dad used to say Irene never forgets a name, a face, or a detail that matters. We hugged a little stiffly, like people carrying years between them. "Still have that cabin?" she asked, studying my face. "Apparently not," I said. She blinked, then gestured to the corner table. "Sit." Noelle, bring him the cedar mug. Irene poured her own tea from a thermos, steam rising like something sacred. "So, I heard it changed hands in 2021. Funny thing though, I keep every deed copy in my file room, you know that. Your father gave me full copies after every change." "Did he file one for the 2021 transfer?" Her brow furrowed. "That's the odd part. I only saw a summary in the county record. No original, just a reference number." Noelle returned, handing me a chipped ceramic mug with Lakeside Haven etched in blue cursive. The glaze was cracked near the handle. My father had bought a dozen of them from a fair in Kenosha. I recognized the imperfection. "I found this in the back," Noelle said. "Also this." She handed me a yellowed postcard. On the front, a watercolor of the cabin painted by a local artist. On the back, Dad's handwriting. "Ellison, bring paint next trip. Roof's looking like a patchwork quilt." "Dad." I stared at the date, July 2004. "Where did you get this?" It was tucked inside one of the cookbooks in the back bookshelf. Thought it was a bookmark. I ran my thumb across the edge, careful not to smudge the fading ink. Irene stood and walked to the storeroom. A minute later, she returned with a slim manila folder. Don't get your hopes up, she warned. Inside a photocopy of an old co-ownership form, early 2021. The names printed on the page, Aveline Tate. Thatcher Tate. No Ellison Tate. No signature from me. Just a faint scrawl that looked oddly detached. Neat but impersonal. You didn't sign this, did you? Irene asked, squinting at the lower right-hand line. I stared at the signature, silent. It looked like mine, but off like someone tracing a photo instead of writing from muscle memory. I didn't answer, not yet. If you never signed it, Irene said. Laying the page flat on her kitchen table, someone did it for you. The words settled like dust between us. I didn't answer. I just kept looking at the paper. The signature on the bottom corner, it looked like mine. Same cursive lean, same abbreviated flourish in the E. But it didn't feel like mine. It felt sterile, as if someone had practiced it just enough to get close. The rain started sometime before noon. It tapped on the wide kitchen window, soft at first, then more steady, like someone pacing on a roof. I drained the rest of my lukewarm coffee and folded the paper once, then again. County clerks open until 4, Irene said. I'll drive if you don't want to be seen. I blinked. Why wouldn't I want to be seen? She shrugged her eyes, giving nothing away. Small town, old cabin, new owners. You never know who's watching. We didn't talk much during the drive. Irene's Subaru was warm and smelled faintly of lavender. She kept the heat low and the windshield wipers on the lowest setting, the rhythm hypnotic. Every so often I'd glance at the copy of the deed sitting between us in the console. Each time the signature looked more wrong. At the county clerk's office, a young man in a knit vest greeted us with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Hi there, how can I help? I'm looking for deed history on a property 1041 Birch Point Lane, I said. He typed quickly. Let's see. Yep. Changed hands in March 2021. Transferred from dual family co-ownership to private sole ownership. Pretty standard. Simplification, we call it. Simplified, I repeated. The word stuck in my throat. Do you have the transfer file? He glanced at the screen again. No originals on file here. It says transfer via internal counsel, notarized off-site. We just received the summary affidavit. That's legal under revised property code since 2020. You'd have to contact the family's attorney of record for more. He said it like a script he'd repeated a dozen times. Who filed the summary? Looks like Joel Anson. That name familiar to you? I forced a nod. Yeah, that's my brother-in-law. Back in the car, I stared through the windshield. Rain now came harder, splashing over the edges of the wiper arc. Irene sat quietly, waiting for me to speak. I never gave Joel anything, I finally said. Not a signature, not consent. Nothing. She pursed her lips. Joel always had a way with paperwork. Polished, quiet, persistent forgery. Irene didn't flinch. We drove back to her house. The rain let up slightly, leaving a sheen across the front steps. She didn't bother asking if I had other plans. We both knew what came next. Attics this way, she said, unlocking a narrow side door and handing me a flashlight. Bring gloves. The attic smelled like history. Dry wood, mothballs, aged paper. I sneezed once, then again. Irene flicked on a bare bulb hanging from a cord. Boxes lined the eaves, all labeled in tight block handwriting. Tate, 2001-2004 Lake Properties. Mixed legal, Joel A. She handed me a box cutter. For over an hour, we dug. Most of it was benign insurance renewals, septic system diagrams, newsletters from the Lake Geneva Preservation Society. Then, buried under a stack of old newsletters, Irene pulled out a thin folder with a green tab, Co-Ownership Revision 2021. Inside was a notarized statement, a signature line. And there it was again, my name written in that not quite right version. But this time, it had a notary stamp beside it, signed and sealed in a county 2 hours south. Dated March 12, 2021. I stared at it. I wasn't even in Wisconsin that week, I said. Where were you? In Seattle. HR audit. I still have the hotel receipts. Irene nodded. Then this is not only fishy, it's fraudulent. I didn't say anything. I was too busy comparing the signature on the notarized document to one from an old W-2 I had tucked in my wallet. The slant was off. The pressure light where it should have been firm. The cross on the T in Tate hovered, instead of striking through. Whoever did it was close, but they didn't know how I wrote under stress. They didn't know the little quirks. Thunder rolled in the distance, just one long, low groan, the kind that stayed under your skin. We sat on the attic floor, the paperwork splayed around us. Irene reached into a manila folder and pulled out a printed email, yellowed slightly from age. The header read, "From Joel Anson to Aveline Tate, subject deed, admin cleanup. Let me handle the signatures. I'll route the documents through my contact. Faster this way. No attachment, just the implication." "I knew it," I whispered. "He just scrubbed me out." Irene didn't respond right away. She was looking out the tiny attic window, watching the storm roll in over the lake. Before he passed, I said quietly, "Dad left me a voicemail. I hadn't played it in a while." I dug out my phone, scrolled, pressed play. The sound was grainy, but his voice was clear. "El, whatever happens with that place, remember, it's for all of you. But especially you. You kept it going longest. That means something." I paused it before it ended. I couldn't bear the last line where he laughed softly and said, "Bring that weird chili of yours next time. I miss it already." I looked up. Irene's eyes were wet, but she didn't wipe them. "I don't care if I win in court," I said. She turned to me. "You think you'd win?" I hesitated. "Then I don't know." She picked up the email again, held it to the light. "That's not always the point, Ellison. You're making this harder than it has to be," Joel said, pouring himself a glass of Cabernet with a steadiness that felt rehearsed. The stem of the glass caught the under-cabinet lighting, refracting red onto the white marble counter like a warning light. Ellison sat stiffly at the far end of the kitchen island, palms flat against the cold stone back, straight heart muted. Outside, the lake had turned from slate gray to ink. Inside, everything gleamed spotless surfaces. Recessed lights, Aveline's minimalist art. If the old cabin had smelled of cedar and soot, this house smelled of lemon oil and detachment. "I came to talk," Ellison said, voice steady but measured. "Not to be handled." Joel swirled the wine and smiled, not without charm. "Then let's talk like family. No need for lawyers, no need for wounds." From the hall, Aveline appeared holding a narrow wooden box in both hands. Her blouse was crisply ironed, but her eyes were tired. She didn't speak as she laid the box between them. Joel made no move to touch it. Ellison opened the lid. Inside, cushioned in black velvet, lay the cabin key, the one his father had handed him in 1999. Only now the stem was cracked, bent inward like something twisted under strain. He exhaled long and slow. "I found it last week," Aveline said, voice quieter than the hum of the fridge. "Joel thought you'd want it." "I did," Ellison said. "I do." A long pause. Then Joel leaned forward, elbows on marble wine glass between his fingers. "Look, El, I know you're upset. I get it. But the deed's clean. The signatures are there. We didn't fabricate anything. It was just cleaned up." "Cleaned up," Ellison repeated. "That's what you call erasing me?" Joel didn't blink. The house needed a future. "You hadn't been back in years. I thought we were all on the same page. I never left the page." "You tore it out." Aveline flinched. Her eyes darted between them, then down. Joel continued, calm as ever. "You could still be part of this. We can make it right. Quietly, I'm willing to compensate." Ellison stood up. "You mean buy me out?" Joel met his gaze, measured. "If that's what it takes to end this without noise." Silence folded around them like winter fog. "I'll think about it," Ellison said, but the words were hollow. He already knew. Aveline walked him to the door. Halfway through the entryway, she touched his elbow. "You should have stayed in Milwaukee," she said, not quite unkindly. "I did," he said. "Too long." Outside, the wind bit harder. Snow dusted the SUV in the driveway like sugar on something already too sweet. He didn't look back. At the lodge, he slid the cracked key from his coat pocket and laid it on the desk. The brass had dulled. A sharp edge from the fracture caught the lamplight, dull red and sad. He sat staring at it, unmoving. He didn't cry, but he wanted to. The subject line hit like a slap. "Final good faith offer, Ellison Tate." Under it, a ping, Joel's lawyer had CC'd the entire family. I opened the email and read it 3 times. Each line felt colder than the last. Dear Mr. Tate, please find attached a memorandum of understanding outlining the terms of peaceful resolution regarding the disputed ownership of 2 Lakeside Drive. A goodwill offer of $15,000 is extended contingent upon permanent waiver of future claims and confidentiality. C. Doyle Esquorn, Juan Meyer and Doyle LLP. Attached was a PDF, standard font, neutral layout, and halfway through it, buried between the indemnity clauses and quiet settlement language, sat my name typed under a signature line dated 2 years prior. I hadn't signed it. I hadn't seen it. But there it was. The lie digitized and time-stamped. Outside snow from the previous week clung to the edges of the windowsill. Inside, the microwave buzzed behind me burnt rice again. I hadn't remembered setting it. I replied briefly to the lawyer, acknowledged, will review. Then I hit reply all. Just 2 words more. This isn't over. My palms were damp. I wiped them on my jeans, then stared at the screen. A few seconds later, 3 red receipts blinked in. I called Irene. She didn't ask how I was, just said, come by tomorrow. I have someone you should meet. That night I didn't sleep. The apartment was loud with silence, lit by the stale glow of fluorescent tubes. I dug the printed document from the laser printer tray and brought out the cheap magnifying glass I kept in the kitchen drawer for reading soup can labels. The signature looked like mine, almost, but the loop on the T was too shallow, and the date, the 7, was too clean, too mechanical. My 7s always slanted. At 10 sharp the next morning, I stood outside Irene's bungalow with a manila folder clutched in one hand and a frozen coffee in the other. My stomach hadn't wanted anything warmer. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of old lavender and oatmeal. Irene ushered me in, then called toward the back. Monroe. He's here. Attorney Monroe looked like a man who'd retired 3 times but kept coming back out of principle. Tweed jacket, elbow patches, and eyes that had seen too many forms of injustice to be surprised anymore. He didn't shake my hand, just nodded and said, "Show me what they sent you." We sat at the kitchen table, paper between us, and for a moment he said nothing. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a fine point pen. "They're bold," he muttered. "Not smart, but bold." I handed him the magnifier. He held it with the elegance of someone who had once cross-examined corporate heirs. "See this," he said, tapping a faint line across the bottom margin. They reused an old agreement. Just layered a new text. Look at the pixel density, blurry here, crisp there. That's signatures scanned from a driver's license. I stared. "You've got grounds," he said. "More than you think." I nodded slowly. "I don't have money for a fight." He smiled, brief and tired. "Some things aren't about money. They're about dignity. I'm retired, but I take cases like this. Predatory inheritance moves. Mostly for folks who can't shout loud enough on their own." I didn't say anything. I didn't trust myself not to break the silence. By late afternoon, Monroe had typed a 2-page document with no fanfare, notice of intent to dispute title and pursue civil relief. He slid it across the table. "I'll file it Monday. It's not a lawsuit, not yet, but it tells them you've stood up." I nodded. "Thank you." He folded the paper neatly, tapped it twice against the table's edge, then slid it into a cream envelope. I stood up to leave. "Ellison," he said, just as I reached the door, "be ready. They'll come back hard. I know." Back at my apartment, I placed the envelope on the small desk by the window. For a long time, I didn't move. The only sound was the hum of the fridge and the distant rattle of pipes overhead. Then my phone rang. "Joel." I let it buzz twice before answering. "You've made a mistake, Ellison," he said, his voice smooth and unhurried. "I never lose." I didn't answer. I let the silence hold. Then I said, "That makes 2 of us." The call came just after 7. I was watching the steam rise off a bowl of soup. I didn't feel like eating when the screen lit up Aveline. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. She didn't say hi. She just whispered, "I didn't think he'd erase you." Her voice cracked like the cabin's old wood paneling in spring thaw. There was a long pause. I let it stretch. I thought she continued, "He was just..." streamlining, making it cleaner. The taxes, the inheritance paperwork, Dad left such a mess. I thought we were just sorting it out. I didn't answer. Because I remembered her at Dad's funeral standing beside Joel, not looking at me. Because I remembered asking in 2021 if there were any updates on the cabin, and she'd said, Joel's handling it. Because I remembered silence thick and heavy since then. I need to see you, she said. Her office was somewhere near the medical campus. All white gloss and abstract panels that looked expensive without saying anything. I sat across from her on a cream chair with edges so sharp it felt like a sculpture. She slid a glass of rosé toward me. I didn't touch it. Neither did she. The silence between us felt brittle like frost on a window. You know we'll melt soon, but not yet. I found this last week, she said. Her fingers, thin and pale, pushed forward a maroon folder. It was in one of Dad's old document boxes. Joel said to toss the whole thing. I opened the flap. Inside, familiar pages. A property deed from 2001. A letter in Dad's handwriting, the ink slightly faded but precise. My name and Thatcher's and hers, all listed as co-owners. There was a post-it and Aveline said, quietly stuck to that top page. It just said, hold this safe. In Dad's handwriting. I ran my fingers along the edge. The corner was slightly torn, the sign someone had removed a staple too quickly. I didn't know, she repeated, eyes flicking toward the wall behind me. I didn't know Joel filed a corrected version, or that he left you off. I looked at her, not with anger, not with forgiveness, just trying to see who she was after all this time. I thought you were part of it, I said. I was adjacent, she murmured. I didn't ask the questions I should have. A long silence sat between us. She stood, walked over to a cabinet, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a second folder, thinner, older. She laid it gently on the desk, like a delicate artifact. I didn't tell Joel I found this. It was a will, not the official one filed with the county. That one had been bland sanitized. This was handwritten, dated 6 months before Dad's death. I recognized the pen he always used, the slope of his E's, the way he looped my name as if protecting it. And across the top corner, a smear like a watermark. I leaned closer, the unmistakable ring of a coffee cup stain. The scent rose, too faint but real. Old pine and paper and the ghost of Dad's cologne. He wrote this after that dinner at the cabin, Aveline said. The one in 2015, I remembered. The last time all three of us had been there together. Thatcher too quiet, Joel checking his watch. Aveline smiling too brightly. Dad had made pasta and forgotten to add salt. We ate it anyway. I turned the page over. The clause was there. In case of dispute, I want Ellison to hold equal share. He kept the key, and he kept the care. I didn't breathe for a moment. Joel can't know you have this, I said quietly. He doesn't, she replied. Yet, I looked up. Why now? Aveline's eyes were rimmed red, her jaw tight. Because I don't want to be the kind of person who lets things disappear. Not again. The clock on her desk ticked loud in the silence. I slid both folders into my bag. As I stood to leave, she said without rising, if you move forward. I stopped. There's no coming back for us. I didn't reply, but I didn't sit back down either. Noelle's hands trembled a little when she placed the box in mine. It's not perfect, she said, brushing a curl from her forehead. But he thought it should come home. I lifted the lid. Nestled in a small bed of cloth sat the cabin key, bronze, burnished, no longer broken. A hairline weld still shimmered faintly along the shaft. It didn't try to hide its fracture. It embraced it. It's whole again, I said. She nodded. My grandfather kept it after he saw it crack. Said it wasn't something you throw away. Just needed a little heat and patience. I turned the key over in my palm, the weld cool against my skin. The shop sat on the edge of town, past where the tourists stopped caring, and the road dipped with winter cracks. A hand-painted sign read, Lucas Ironworks. No logo, no website, just old wood, the scent of coal, and the kind of doorbell that buzzed low like a cello string. Lucas was taller than I expected, with the beard the color of ash and hands the size of dinner plates. His grip when we shook was warm but worn. I remember your dad, he said. Voice a soft baritone over the low hum of jazz from a corner radio. He helped me file the permits when the city tried to rezone this lot. Back in '97, said every town needed a good key man. He smiled, looking at the key in my hand. He was right. The shop was alive with tiny sounds, grit underfoot, the sizzle of cooling metal, the soft clink of tools returning home. Sparks had fallen on the floor earlier that morning, leaving black kisses on the concrete. Lucas led me to the back workbench. A piece of paper lay there, my father's old sketch of the cabin door's lock plate. He left this here once, Lucas said. Said he wanted to remind me what the key protected. Not just wooden nails, you understand, I nodded. We didn't speak for a while. Later at the lodge, I spread the documents across the bed. The forged deed. The real co-ownership file. The handwritten will with the ring of cafe still blooming at its corner. And the photograph, us 3 kids awkwardly smiling in front of the cabin, Dad's arms around our shoulders, like we were always supposed to fit. I didn't want to fight in court anymore. It wasn't cowardice. It was clarity. Some battles are best handed to others, not avoided, but passed forward with precision, like an heirloom or a key. That evening, I walked into the small Milwaukee office of Air Justice Midwest, a nonprofit Irene once mentioned over tea. The receptionist smiled when I placed the manila envelope on her desk. For review, I said. She leafed through it: property documents, the real will, notarized statements, email printouts. I slid over a photo of Dad in his canoe, the one where he's laughing so hard he's nearly falling out. She looked up. Do you want a case filed in your name? No, I said. Just make sure the next guy doesn't get erased. She nodded. We will. On the drive back, the radio played a song I hadn't heard in years. A slow jazz tune Dad used to hum when chopping onions. My hands resting on the steering wheel didn't tremble anymore. I parked by the lake just after dusk. Noelle stood near the dock, jacket zipped to her chin, thermos in hand. He would have liked this, she said, nodding toward the water. I think he would have, I said. She looked at me, then toward the horizon. So what'll you do with your share, Ellison? I didn't answer right away. The lake rippled gently, the last bit of sun kissing the edges of the cabin roof, far in the distance. The key sat in my pocket, warm from my palm. I don't know yet, I said, but it'll matter. The new sign hung slightly crooked and no one minded. The paint dripped a little where one of the kids had tried to draw a birch tree with a brush too thick for the twiggy lines. Above it, in blue block letters that wobbled with confidence, Camp Birch, for grieving families. I stood on the porch of what used to be the Tate cabin, mug of Week Lodge coffee in hand, now filled with cloudy watercolor from a boy who'd mistaken it for his rinse cup. I didn't wash it. It felt right to let it stay. The grass had been mowed, not perfectly, but lovingly. Aveline's email had come 2 months ago, quiet like a blanket folded and left at the foot of a bed. I hope the kids find what we lost. I'm sorry I let it go the way I did. Aveline. Joel never replied to the final notice from Air Justice. No countersuit, no apology. Word around town was he'd left for Arizona, or maybe Oregon, somewhere where polished kitchens and plausible deniability still counted for something. Inside the cabin, the layout remained pine walls, same creek in the third stair, but the energy had shifted. There were color bins now, drawing pads, worn teddy bears from donors across the state. A shelf near the fireplace held books about grief for every age. The same mantel now bore picture frames of people I didn't know, mothers and sons, siblings. One photo of a dog with a hand-lettered tag for Max. He always knew when I was sad. Noelle passed me on her way out to the front yard, where a girl with tight curls and a splash of blue on her overalls was tying streamers to a paper lantern. We're starting the journal group at 2, she said, eyes bright. Want to sit in later, I said. I've got my session now. In the old sunroom, I arranged the folding chairs. 4 this week, just enough. I laid out the prompt pages, each with the same title across the top, Memory Through Objects. In the corner, I placed a small ceramic bowl filled with things for them to choose from: a ticket stub, a feather, a broken watch, a marble, a Polaroid. The first child in was a boy of about 9. He didn't say much, just picked up the marble and held it to the light. Is this your house? He asked quietly. I smiled. Not anymore, I said. It's yours now. After the workshop, I walked the perimeter of the lawn. Irene was sipping lemonade in a lawn chair, chatting with Lucas about rust-proofing a gazebo frame. Noelle was laughing with a volunteer dad as they adjusted the rope on a swing. The afternoon sun filtered through the birch leaves, casting lace shadows onto the grass. I pulled the bronze key from my pocket. The weld still caught the light. Inside the front door, there was a wooden peg, just one driven into the old beam. No brass plaque, no ceremony. I hung the key there and stepped back. The cabin breathed around me, not with nostalgia now, but with presence, with motion, with the small sounds of children laughing, the rustle of craft paper, the click of an old ceiling fan wobbling just slightly off-center. There was nothing left I needed to take with me. Just before I walked out, I glanced at the mug again, watercolors swirling faintly inside blues and browns, and a hint of gold. It looked like the lake on a warm evening. Outside, a breeze came through the trees. I let it lift my collar, let it brush against the skin, just under my throat, where the wind always felt a little cooler. I stepped into the sun. The welded key still hangs by the cabin door, catching afternoon light like a scar that's healed but never hidden. I walked past it this morning, carrying a tray of orange slices and paper cups for the kids painting under the birch trees. Funny how justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes it arrives through quiet choices, repaired bonds, and letting go with grace. I used to think being written out meant I didn't matter. Now I know you can lose a house and still find a home. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? I'd love to hear your story, leave a comment, or share what helped you rebuild.